All right, well, thank you, Mackenzie, and welcome to everyone. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I do around here. Government relations is, it's your advocacy, it's your legislative updates, it's those things that you don't necessarily think about. So our team is quite small right now. There's me. I've been here since 2012. I previously have worked in the House and the Senate. I've sort of done it all. I've been in the majority, the minority. I've been in the House and the Senate. I've been on policy, and I've been in office staff. So I've sort of done it all, seen it all, which makes every day still a little bit interesting. And I've been director here since 2014. Liz just joined us, and she couldn't be with us today, but she just joined MASB this spring, and she has been a great support for me. And she's also serving as support for the legal department and leadership department. But she is one that is helping sort of behind the scenes with those research things and registration things for GR and stuff like that, that just has been invaluable. So hopefully you'll get to meet her sometime soon. There we go. So what do? We are staff support for our Government Relations and Resolutions and Bylaws Committee. Those committees are member committees. So they are chosen from people who request to be on them. And then we go through those requests and make sure that we have a balance of our committee that both represents different size and types of districts, but also geographically represents the state. So when we sit down and have conversations about issues, we're talking to people from the tip of the UP to the border with Ohio and everybody in between, and making sure that we've got some urban, suburban, rural, so that we get a really well-rounded idea of where people are coming from, because we know every district is different, and we want to make sure that we get those various viewpoints when we're having these conversations. We also set our legislative priorities. We do that through a whole process that we just went through last fall. We do it in the fall of even numbered years. We hold hearings around the state. We bring in people to brainstorm and work our priorities from there. We will give legislative updates whenever we're asked, whenever we can. We do those both for our members. We also tend to do them for CASBAs or for business officials groups. And we provide some of the trainings for you. 108 is our biggest one, and that's basically how a bill becomes a law, but without the funny little dancing bill. It's a little bit longer, a little more involved. We send out news from the Capitol every Friday that that legislature is in session. And I'm going to say this multiple times today, but if you are not receiving news from the Capitol, if you didn't get an alert from us last night telling you to oppose a collective bargaining bill, then you're not in our advocacy system properly. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but try to think back. Have you received that? Have you not? Because I want to make sure that everybody is getting those. We also do views from the Capitol 3 times a year. We do one to recap the state of the state. We do one to recap the budget. We do that one in conjunction with the school business officials. That one will probably be coming up in about a month if we're lucky. We do that after the budget is passed and on its way to the governor, so we can tell you what to expect. And then we do one in November, which is normally a lame duck preview, to say, here's the last things we think that they're going to try to rush through in those last 6 weeks of session, just so that you sort of know what to expect from that too. We've done them when special things have popped up, but we always have those 3. And then finally, we hold 2 events a year that are our lobby days. We call them behind the scenes at the Capitol. We do them in the House office building, although we might be switching into the Capitol. They have a beautiful new visitor center we want to take advantage of, but we do one in the spring and one in the fall. We find hot topics to talk about and spend just over half the day in the conference, and then let you loose in Lansing so that you can go meet with your own representatives and senators. But mainly, we are your support, your advocates at the Capitol and with Congress, because we know you can't all be there, but we want to make sure that school boards' voices are heard. So the committee assignments, as I started to say, said a little bit about, we make these committee assignments. They start in August of each year. There are actually 3 committees, 2 that are run by the Government Relations Department and 1 that is run by our legal department, and that's the Legal Trust Fund. So we send out calls for committees in Dashboard and News from the Capitol. Those should be out. You probably have seen them by now. The application window closes at the end of June. We put together the committees, the board approves them in July, and you're notified, and your committee starts in August. Our Government Relations Committee this year, it says started with 23 members because we actually lost a couple who lost their elections while they were serving. But we normally try to aim for that 20 to 25 people on our committee. As I said, we pick from different types of districts and from all over the state because we really want that balance of voices. We want to make sure that when we take a position as MASB, we have taken into consideration all the different types of districts that are out there. We develop those association positions on state and federal legislation, and then all of the recommendations from that committee go to the board of directors. So I sit down with Liz and we put together what bills do we know are coming, what issues are coming up, what have people brought to us that they're looking for our opinion on, and that's how we form our agenda for the committee. And then we have those discussions in committee on each individual issue and bill number to come up with our position. And then it's also a way that we can share thoughts and viewpoints, and those committee members can talk to their fellow board members and to other people in surrounding districts, just to really make sure that we're getting all the information that we need in order to advocate in the best way for you. The R&B committee is 18 members right now, a little smaller than usual. They go through, I should have meant, the Government Relations Committee meets monthly as long as the legislature is in session. So they tend to meet January through June. We'll take July off. We'll come back August through December. In election years, we meet a little less, and the June one is always tentative. It depends on if there's anything to talk about if we know the legislature isn't going to be around. The R&B committee is a little less meeting intensive. There's 3, at least, sometimes 4. They start in the beginning of the year, and they are tasked with going through all of our resolutions and all of our bylaws to see if there's any changes that need to be made, if there's any updates, if there's things that can be deleted, if there's things that should be added. Do we need new resolutions for MASB? And our resolutions are divided into 2 different pieces. One are governance resolutions, sort of best practices for boards. And the other are those advocacy resolutions that talk about issues on a broad scale, not by bill number, but broad scale, like we support removing the ban on starting before Labor Day. Like that's one of our resolutions. We have a resolution dealing with parent input with schools and wanting parent input, dealing with some of the things that their students go through and things like that. All of that is available on our website. Individual school boards can also submit proposals. And so you would vote on that at your board meeting and then send that in to me and to Cheryl Huffman, who helps staff this one as well. And we present that to the committee in August. And then all of the changes, the new resolutions, anything that the board puts together, they come back and they put it all together for the delegate assembly. The delegate assembly is our annual meeting, and that meeting is where all districts can be represented. They all have voting members, and they vote on the work that the Resolutions and Bylaws Committee has put together and put forward. So as I said, delegate assembly is our annual meeting. As a nonprofit, we have to have an annual meeting of membership, and we call ours the delegate assembly. It is held in conjunction with our annual leadership conference every year. It's the night before. Each district votes on their delegates to be voting members. This is an official vote at your board meeting. And as we get closer, you will get reminders about that. And then you submit back who your delegates are going to be. Those people are then marked as voting delegates when you get to delegate assembly. And they are the ones who will vote on the changes that are presented from the R&B committee. Anyone can attend, and everyone is invited to the delegate assembly, and anyone can speak at the delegate assembly, but only those that were approved as the voting delegate from their board may actually cast the vote. The rest of the delegate assembly, we hear from the president, we hear from the executive director about the association for the year. There's a brief legislative update. We normally cover things that have happened in the year, things that we're proud of, things that we're not proud of. Just whatever may have happened in the last 12 months since our last meeting. And then we go through each individual proposal from the Resolutions and Bylaws Committee. So the delegate assembly itself is not a set amount of time. It really depends on how many votes there are and how much debate happens. Headed into this one, we don't have a ton of votes, so it might be one of the shorter ones. So I encourage all of you to come see what it's like, because it'll be better than one of the longer ones. So setting our legislative priorities. This is a process that is very intensive, but I am able to walk into a meeting with a legislator and say everything I'm giving them for priorities are 100% member driven. And there aren't a lot of associations that can do that. A lot of associations will do this the other way around. The staff will come up with some ideas for priorities and the board will work from that. We build these from the ground up. We hold 10 meetings across the state in September and October of those even numbered years, one in every region, and then one each in Macomb, Oakland, and Wayne counties. We then we ask you at those meetings to sit with board members from other districts and brainstorm on what needs to be changed, what doesn't need to be changed, what would funding be really helpful for. And there's only 2 rules. You can't say, I want more money. You have to be specific about what. And you can't say Lansing should just leave us alone, because wanting more money and Lansing leaving you alone is the basis of our lobbying. We want more specifics. We want to know, what do you need changed? What ideas do you have that we could work on? So then we take all of those brainstormed ideas and we put it into a survey, divide it into about 4 categories, send it back out to everybody, to all of the members, and say, okay, here's all your brainstormed ideas. Now pick from those in each category your top 3. We get complaints every year that this is very difficult, but that's the point. We want to make sure that the things you're picking are things that truly stand out to you. So then when the survey closes, we take all of that information, we take the top vote getters from the survey and take that to the Government Relations Committee to narrow down, to finesse, and to create the list. And then the list goes to the board in January for adoption. And then we start our meet and greets with the brand new legislature after that January board meeting and start talking about our legislative update or our legislative priorities and how we can get them included in what's going on in the legislature for that session. You can view all of our priorities online. I will say this year it's been more fun than most, I guess, because many of our priorities have been reflected in the budget. And so we've been able to actually make some headway on a lot of the priorities that you see. So how do we represent you? We take all of this information we're gathering from our legislative updates, from the Government Relations Committee, from emails that you send or calls that you make, and put together testimony and committee hearings on pertinent legislation. So far this year, I have testified on sinking funds for school buses, on tax captures for housing that would take it away from our schools. And tomorrow I will be testifying along with MASA on prohibited subjects of bargaining and the repeal of some of those. So we pick those big issues that really matter and we'll testify on those. We also may submit written testimony on something or just show support or opposition. We work with the bill sponsors and committee chairs on changes or potential new legislation. I was in a meeting just before this working on something for water filters in schools to make sure that before this passes, that it takes into account what schools truly face when it comes to replacing a water fountain. And we submit written testimony at those times where we don't necessarily speak. And really that is just sort of a gut feeling. I can't tell you there's rules as to when we speak and when we don't. It's more how we think the committee is going to go and how receptive are they going to be. And in the case of tomorrow, it is such a big issue. We are actually testifying in person, as well as submitting a letter from MASA, MASB, and about 12 other education organizations, all on that same letter. So it's all of that work we do behind the scenes that is really built off of the Government Relations Committee and the conversations that we have with all of you and other members. So here's 2 of the things that we use a lot to keep you informed. News from the Capitol. This is what I mentioned before. Please make sure you are receiving this. Our advocacy database is separate from our regular database. So if you're receiving dashboard, it doesn't necessarily mean you're receiving news from the Capitol. So we have to upload all of our membership information into our advocacy database. And we do that twice a year. So there are times that we miss people, or maybe you've updated your email and it didn't get copied over. So contact me if you're not getting it. I see Larissa put in the chat the link to sign up if you're not getting it. Also, though, check your spam filter. We have had a lot of trouble with this new system that they moved us to at the end of last year, that it's getting caught in a lot of people's spam filters. So I highly recommend you check your spam filter and try to whitelist the sender. Sometimes it allow all emails from this sender. If it's a district block, you may need to talk to your district IT people. There's not much we can do from our side if it's going into your spam filter, but please check there. And then what you see next to that is the website. So this is what our website, our advocacy website looks like when you go to our action center. Currently, there is a third alert up there. I took this picture too soon. But you'll find any of our alerts. That budget update that's there will be updated as the budget moves. So that will remain up there until we do the next budget. Under blog posts, you find all of our old news from the Capitol. So if you missed one or you wanted to look back, all of our news from the Capitol for the entire legislative session will be up there. And then you see the spot where it says sign up for alerts. That's where you can go. That's the link that Larissa put in. We ask that you sign yourself up because it asks for your personal information. So when we send one of these alerts, like the one you see there that says take action, oppose House Bill 4044, when we send that, when you click on it to go send to take action, it pre-populates for you. So it will have your representative or your senator there. You'll be able to see the reason we're asking for this, and then our talking points to help you fill in the email. There will be 1 or 2 lines in the email box, but what we really want you to do is fill that in yourself. You can pick and choose from our talking points that are there, but really we encourage you using your specific examples from your district, because that's what changes people's minds, is when they look at their community and what's happening, how does this affect them? How does this affect your, their schools? That's what they want to know. And my job is to make sure they understand on a big picture, but where we need your help is to make them understand that one-on-one, if you do this, this is how your district will respond. And like I said earlier, there was an alert that went out last night, so you can check for that. And News from the Capitol did go out last Friday afternoon at some point. The alert last night came just after 5 o'clock. So this is an example of the alert that went out on 4044. So this is what shows up in your email box. And when you click that take action button, that's when it kicks you to our site and shows you like, who is your representative? Here's their email address. So you don't have to go find any of that. We make it as simple as possible because we want you to get involved. We want you to know who represents you, your representative and your senator, especially at the state level. We want you to share those stories, especially good ones. Too much bad news is in the news. Tell people how great your district is. But when it comes to things like alerts and other legislation we're working on, that's where that direct impact on your district comes in. Explain what happens if this bill passes. What does your district look like now? How would this change things? And as I said, we try to make it as easy as possible with those alerts, so that we can give you as much information as we can, so that if you only have a minute or two, you can still get that contact out to your representative. We would also say if you've got a relationship with your representative or senator, you don't have to use our alert, but you can take our alert and our information and call them directly if you want. We just want you to contact them whatever way is easiest for you. I get asked a lot, what's the best way to contact my representative or senator? And the best way is just to do it. If that is a phone call, because that's more comfortable for you, if that's an email, if that's a handwritten letter, whatever it is, that's the best way to do it. And we encourage you to say thank you where appropriate. they don't hear thank you much. And I'm guessing many of you haven't heard thank you much. I know you're new board members, so maybe you have in these first few months, but elected jobs are thankless jobs. And so if there's a spot where you can find the opportunity to thank your representative or senator, thank them for voting the way that you wanted them to, thank them for simply responding to your email and sharing their concerns or their thoughts. That thank you can be really powerful. It helps build that relationship, and you stick with them as somebody who's, nice and reasonable, not someone who's constantly contacting them simply because you're mad. Work up these skills. If you haven't done this before, it can be really intimidating, although it shouldn't be, but I understand that it can be. You are all elected officials, same as the people you're contacting. And in many cases, you represent more constituents than they do, but you represent the same constituents. And so when you're talking to them, you have more power than I think we often give ourselves credit for. And certainly board members do not give themselves enough credit for it. You're a volunteer who put your name on the ballot, who subjected yourself to the same election that they did for the same people that they represent. And that gives a level of respect and admiration that maybe someone else in the district may not receive because they haven't gone through the same things. They haven't been that elected official. So we do things to help. We do events that help. Our Views from the Capitol, you can join, find out what's going on. Those are always interactive, so you can ask whatever questions you have about what we're talking about. You can ask questions about how best to address your legislators. We do whatever we can to try to help as we're explaining the issues, but also give you tools to be able to go talk to your legislators. The behind the scenes at the Capitol, as I said before, that's about a half-day event. And then we set you free on the Capitol and ask you to go meet with staff and with legislators. This one that we just did in April, we had a legislative panel with the 2 minority vice chairs of Senate and House Education Committees, and then the chair of the House Education Committee. And the 3 of them spoke to some of the questions we had prepared and then took questions from the audience just to see what the attendees wanted to know. After that, we heard from the Senate Fiscal Agency, who talked about the governor's budget proposal, because we had no other budget proposals to talk about, unfortunately. Then it followed with a conversation with a bond lawyer about sinking funds, because we just passed, the governor just signed on Monday, we're very excited, expanding sinking funds to school buses. And so Troon sent in a lawyer to explain what sinking funds are, how they're used, and how this change will benefit districts. And then we had a conversation about teacher and admin evals, because we expect changes to come on that. And so the conversation was led by the Michigan Association of Secondary School Principals, and because he's entrenched in evals, my counterpart there. And so he spoke about the current law, where the changes could be made, things we're talking about, things we're looking forward to try to change. And then it ends with a quick legislative update from me. And we invite all of your legislators and their staff to lunch. That's the part we can't control, whether or not they show up, but we invite them all and hope that you get a chance to talk to them there. But then we highly encourage you to make those meetings and never underestimate the power of meeting with staff. So we wrap up by 1 o'clock and the rest of the day is yours. We set up a Capitol tour because if you've never been on one of those or you've never been in the Capitol, it is a gorgeous building with great history. So we always recommend that as sort of a fun way to end your day. And then one of the other things that we have is the NSBA's Advocacy Institute. And this is our National School Board Association's lobby day, but it's a weekend. So they come in on Sunday. We spend Sunday afternoon and Monday in the conference. And then on Tuesday, it is just a Hill day. MASB helps facilitate some of these meetings. We do a lunch on Sunday before the conference starts so that everyone that's out there from Michigan can meet each other. And then we talk a little bit about what to expect and the logistics of the Hill Day. And then on the Hill Day, we facilitate a breakfast and invite our U.S. Senators, Stabenow and Peters, and give them each about 20-30 minutes with the group to speak to the group, to take questions. But that way they're not having to field individual meetings from everybody that comes out. Last year we had, I want to say 60 people that came from Michigan. So we have a big group, and that breakfast is sponsored by MASB and has always been sort of a success in bringing them in, getting them in front of board members and hearing those questions. And all of those things always include a piece of how best to be an advocate, and always include pieces to be able to ask questions if you're not sure or you need that boost in confidence before you walk into the meetings. So that's us in a nutshell. Our contact information is there. I will gladly take any questions because we have plenty of time. I talk too fast. But if you ever have questions or you want an update or you heard a bill was going through, but MASB hasn't talked about it, always feel free to contact us. Our emails and phone numbers are there. And we're in the process of getting an assistant director, so there'll be somebody else you can bug as well. So there is a question about the challenges of speaking and advocating in the current partisan environment. Do you feel like advocacy must continue regardless of how you know it may be voted on? And how do you feel we best come together on education that's less partisan? I'm going to start with the second question. Should you advocate even if you know where your legislator's at? And the answer is 100% yes. Even if they disagree with you and you know they're not going to agree with you, you don't want to give the power to the negative to be able to say, I never heard from my schools, they must not care. And on the other side, if you know they absolutely agree with you, you're giving them a boost to say, my schools have contacted me about this and they think, and go on to the reason we support. So either way, it is always important to reach out, build those relationships. Someday you never know, you may be on the same side. I think that was the biggest takeaway when we went to DC this year. Someone asked Senator Stabenow, as she's facing retirement, what do you think is your greatest takeaway from all your time in Congress? And her answer was, you can work with everybody. That what you need to do is find the one thing you do agree on and work on that. And she used examples from some of the very far right that she has worked with. She used Ted Cruz as an example, and I'm blanking on the name of the person she's working with right now, but it's someone else who she said, we disagree 80% of the time, but on this issue, we can come together. And I just thought that was really powerful advice to say, just because you disagree a lot doesn't mean there isn't something you agree on. And so you never want to give up. You want to find that thing that you can agree on and that one thing you can work on and go get it done. And it's all about that relationship building. It can be challenging to advocate in a very partisan environment. You do find legislators that can be difficult to talk to. And those are where it's still worth the effort. Maybe those are ones you send the email versus meeting with them in person. It's figuring those sorts of things out. You still want to reach out, but if they are really difficult in those one-on-one situations, send an email, write a letter, avoid the one-on-one. But the advocacy is still there. It's still important. It just does feel difficult sometimes. And coming together on education that's less partisan is always a challenge. Unfortunately, through the years, it feels like public education has become more and more polarizing, which it shouldn't. And so it comes back to finding those things we agree on and working toward those. The current positives regarding education coming from the budget. Well, the House and the Senate are running their budgets right now as we speak. I don't know if the school aid budgets will get done today, but they're working on it. There's a lot of positives in them. There is an increase in the per pupil. There is an increase in special ed. The House and the Senate have fully funded special ed, so you would get 100% of the per pupil to help cover those costs. Last year it was 85, and before that it was even lower. We're seeing increases in the support for at-risk students in the House budget. They tie it to a percentage of the per pupil. So as the per pupil changes and goes up, so will the support for your at-risk kids. And we see the same thing in English language learners, a huge increase, and that tie back to as the per pupil goes up, so will these other buckets of funding. The House budget also includes, for the first time in a very, very long time, a categorical for transportation. And this is one thing we heard across the state when we did our meetings last year, that transportation sucks so much of your general operating budget. And for some districts, it's millions. And so this looks at transportation from how many kids you're busing per square mile, and then sets up a scale for how much you would receive per pupil to help cover some of those costs. The other positive I would mention that we've been talking about a lot are free meals for all students. Again, we heard this a lot, and how beneficial it was in COVID. And so we had set this as a priority with the federal government to get the USDA to put those waivers back in so that the feds would pay for meals. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like we're going to get traction on that at the federal level, but then we came back to Michigan and the governor surprised us by putting it in her budget. The House and the Senate have both included it as well. And so it would require you to forgive all of your lunch debt, but there is also an appropriation to reimburse you for that. And then it's $160 million to reimburse you for the cost of meals. There is some additional reporting requirements so that we know how many meals are going out, how many meals the districts provide. But this would allow access to free breakfast and free lunch for every student in the building. So those are the big things we've been talking about, the big positives in these budgets. And I think we'll have a better idea of what exactly they'll be probably, well, after May 19th, as I look at the calendar. May 19th is a consensus revenue estimating conference, which I know sounds super exciting. It's 2 hours of economists telling you about light truck sales and home sales and how the budget's going to move and where the revenues are going to come from. But at the end, they come up with what they expect the revenues to be for the state for the next year. When we get those numbers, that's when we set the final budgets. So we'll have a better idea then. We do expect May to be lower than the one they did in January because of some of the budget or some of the revenue decreases that are coming. But that's where they set the numbers from. And that's when we'll have the best idea of what you're going to see. But there's definitely going to be a decent size per pupil increase in there. Trying to catch up on my questions. So who are the advocates for 4044? So 4044 says that when a contract expires, current law says when a contract expires, steps are frozen and healthcare is frozen. And so the staff is responsible for the increased healthcare costs that may roll in before the contract is resettled. This would repeal that so that when the contract expires, step increases would still go into effect and the healthcare coverage would continue. The cost coverage would continue. The advocates have been the unions. They've been some of the teachers. And then the people with us have been the other administrators, the superintendents, the principals associations. So it really has been an admin versus union sort of stance. That bill right now is on the House floor with the majorities as thin as they are in the House. The Dems can only lose one person before they need to get Republicans to side with them. And issues like 4044, like the collective bargaining things that are coming up tomorrow, you're not going to get a lot of love out of the Republicans for those. So they have to hold the caucus together. So we're talking to people about what this actually means to districts. And again, that's where the alert comes from, is so that you can explain if you have to give step increases, even though the contract expires, what does that mean for contract negotiations and for your budgets? And so that's where we're looking for those individual things. Well, we talk about if districts are facing a downturn, they may not be able to afford steps. If they have to give steps, they may have to look at layoffs. But we like when districts can explain that themselves. CPA courses for new board members regarding government relations. 108 is the best place to start. We talk in 108 about how to build relationships with your legislators, about how a bill becomes a law on paper and how a bill becomes a law in practice. We talk more in depth about the Government Relations Committee and how the committee works, that we go through the priorities. We try to give you all the information we can, like sort of taking this PowerPoint I just gave you and expanding it into a lot more knowledge. But we focus a lot on why it's important to get involved and how to do that. So I'd highly recommend 108. And I don't just say that because it's an amazing teacher, me. But I do think if you don't know a lot about the government process, that's where we start. And that's where we start to teach you. The at-risk learners, yes, that is 31A. That is our at-risk categorical. And I can only imagine as new board members, you're getting thrown, especially as you get into budget season, all of those different 31A funds and 31Os and 21Fs and 83s. Unfortunately, school people talk in numbers and acronyms. And so I really recommend both to me, which I should have started there, but also to your business officials and to your superintendents. If you don't know what they're talking about when they say, we don't know what we're going to get for our 31A funds. If you don't know what that is, ask, make sure you understand. People just get so used to speaking in these shorter terms, they forget that we've got new people that don't necessarily know what they are. So always feel free to ask. The free meals for all students is expected to be sustainable budget by budget. That is the goal of putting it in. It also, the work at the federal level will continue to try to get the feds to pick up more of that cost. But the goal is to create these free meals for students to stay in the budget. Appreciate the time behind the scenes. The issues in my district seem so far removed from what the representatives are discussing, and I don't think they would ever think to invite a representative to a district event. I would encourage you to push that idea. Getting representatives and senators into your buildings can change the way they look at your district. I mean, who doesn't like student art on the walls? You know, you get the opportunity when they're in your buildings to show them the cool things that are happening in your building. So I would push them to do that. And it's not that you have to invite them to a school event and give them a stage to speak from. It's just inviting them to be a part of it and to see the culture and to see what goes on in your buildings. And even if you think the issues you're facing are not what's front and center on our legislative tray, it's still worth bringing up because there are always things happening in the background. There are always other conversations going on. When we do a behind the scenes at the Capitol, we pick what's front and center and biggest. But there's a lot of other issues we're dealing with and a lot of other things that we're working on and conversations we're having. And so even if you feel like, well, I don't really have anything to talk about that's on this page of talking points, then talk about what matters to you. Both because that's what your district needs. And you are the strongest advocate when you're talking about something that matters to you. Passion is an incredible advocacy tool. So even if you feel like the talking points we've handed out don't really apply, it still is worth bringing up what does apply for you and having those conversations for you. Because you may find your representative responds to that better than the talking points we gave you. But we're just not, as a statewide organization, able to figure out all the different things that districts want to talk about. And so we pick big picture. But that's why we create these events so that you can bring the local picture directly to them. The Grassroots Advocacy Initiative that was led by DeShandria is continuing. We have switched that into more of a grassroots advocacy CBA. We weren't getting the response and the participation we wanted in the workshops we were doing. And so we thought it might reach more people as a CBA, that we can spend more time with the people really interested in it and go deeper and give them the tools to go back to their districts to create these grassroots advocacy programs themselves. So that is a CBA. We launched that at annual conference last year. And despite DeShandria not being with us anymore, she is still teaching that right now. because she created that and she did a wonderful job and she is willing to come back and teach that to us. We also will always help if you have questions about how do I start, who do I call, who do I involve? Always happy to answer those questions. Just we don't have the formal grassroots advocacy program anymore. Are there questions I've missed? And I look at my moderators as well. I wasn't looking at the chat. So if there's anything I missed or any last thoughts or questions from all of you.
I think we got everything that was in the chat, and it looks like our Q&A box is clear.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here. I hope you learned something, and I hope even more that you're going to go take advantage of those alerts, reach out, contact people, or ask us questions whenever you needed something. Please be sure to reach out. We love to help. We love to get people involved. And thanks for being here.